Constantine I, remembered as Constantine the Great, was Roman emperor from 306 to 337 and is known as the first Roman ruler to embrace Christianity. His reign marked a decisive shift in the history of the empire as he elevated Christianity from a persecuted faith to a protected and increasingly dominant religion. The Edict of Milan, issued in 313, granted Christians freedom of worship and effectively ended state-led persecution. This was a turning point in the Christianization of the empire. Constantine also founded the city of Constantinople, present-day Istanbul, and made it his capital. It would remain the heart of the Eastern Roman, or Byzantine, Empire for more than 1,000 years. He was born on the 27th of February, 272, in the city of Nisus in Moesia Superior, modern Nis in Serbia. During a time when the Roman world was threatened by internal fragmentation and breakaway states, his father, Flavius Constantius, came from Illyrian stock and served in the Roman army, rising through the ranks to become one of the emperors in Diocletian's system of shared rule known as the Tetrarchy. Constantine's mother was Helena, a woman of modest social origins, probably from Bithynia. She later gained renown in Christian tradition for influencing her son's religious turn and was venerated as a saint. As a young man, Constantine served under the emperors Diocletian and Galerius, beginning his military career on campaigns in the eastern provinces against Persia. In 305, he was recalled to the west to accompany his father on campaigns in Britannia. When Constantius died at Eboracum, now York in England, the army immediately proclaimed Constantine as Augustus. Over the following 2 decades, he fought a series of civil wars against rivals, including Maxentius and Licinius. Victory at the Milvian Bridge in 312 gave him control of the Western Empire, and by 324 he had defeated Licinius to become sole ruler of both East and West. As emperor, Constantine carried out sweeping reforms. He separated military and civil authority to reduce abuses of power, reorganized the army into mobile field units and frontier garrisons, and introduced a new gold coin, the solidus. This stable currency endured as the basis of Byzantine and later European economies for more than a millennium. He also launched successful campaigns against Franks, Alemanni, Goths, and Sarmatians, securing the frontiers and repopulating provinces abandoned during the crises of the 3rd century. Though raised in a pagan world, Constantine increasingly favored Christianity after 312. He eventually accepted baptism late in life, administered by Eusebius of Nicomedia, an Arian bishop. Other traditions, however, claimed that Pope Sylvester I had baptized him. Whatever the case, Constantine was the first emperor to openly support the Church. He sponsored the building of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem on the site believed to be the tomb of Christ, called the First Council of Nicaea in 325 to define Christian orthodoxy, and shaped the framework of the Nicene Creed. His patronage pushed Christianity to the forefront of Roman public life, though his precise understanding of the faith is still debated by modern scholars. He lived most of his life as a catechumen, formally joining the Church only at the end. Yet he remains venerated in Eastern Christianity as a saint. Constantine's reign marked the transition from classical antiquity to the Middle Ages. By shifting the imperial capital eastward to Byzantium, which he renamed New Rome, but which soon came to be called Constantinople, he laid the foundation of a city that would stand for over 1,000 years as the seat of emperors. Politically, he abandoned Diocletian's system of 4 co-emperors and restored dynastic succession, leaving the empire to his sons and members of the Constantinian family. His memory was cherished by his heirs and for centuries by both church and state. The medieval church celebrated him as a model Christian ruler, and later monarchs invoked him as a symbol of legitimacy. Renaissance humanists, however, rediscovered writings critical of Constantine and offered more balanced appraisals, a tradition that continues in modern scholarship. In his early life, Constantine probably spent little time with his father, who was often away on military service, and who eventually rose to the governorship of Dalmatia. Constantius was described as tolerant and politically skilled, qualities that helped him prosper under Diocletian, himself a fellow Illyrian officer of humble origins. In 286, Diocletian shared power with Maximian, dividing the empire for practical purposes. Constantius later married Maximian's stepdaughter Theodora, leaving Helena behind. By 293, Diocletian formalized his Tetrarchy, naming Constantius as Caesar in the west and Galerius as Caesar in the east. From this moment, Constantine's destiny as a future emperor was set. He lived at Diocletian's court as the recognized heir of Constantius, training in the company of emperors and preparing for the moment when his chance at power would come. Constantine received a formal education while living at Diocletian's court in Nicomedia, where he studied Latin literature, Greek, and philosophy. The environment of the eastern capital was cosmopolitan and intellectually vibrant, allowing him to encounter both pagan and Christian thinkers. He may even have listened to the lectures of Lactantius, the Christian scholar later famous for his writings. Yet Constantine's place at court was not without political tension, because Diocletian and Galerius did not fully trust his father Constantius. The young Constantine was kept as a kind of guarantor of his father's loyalty. Even so, he held an important position and fought in campaigns for both Diocletian and Galerius. He served in different tribunates, fought against barbarian groups on the Danube in 296, joined Diocletian against the Persians in Syria in 297, and later fought under Galerius in Mesopotamia during 298 and 299. By the end of Diocletian's reign, he had risen to the rank of tribune of the First Order. By 303, Constantine had returned to Nicomedia and witnessed the beginning of what became known as the Great Persecution. In late 302, Diocletian and Galerius had consulted the oracle of Apollo at Didyma about the growing presence of Christians. Shortly after, in February 303, Diocletian ordered the destruction of the church in Nicomedia, the burning of Christian scriptures, and the confiscation of church property. Over the following months, Christians lost official ranks, clergy were imprisoned, and countless churches were destroyed. Constantine later portrayed himself as opposed to these brutal measures, calling them sanguinary edicts against the worshippers of God. But there is no evidence that he actively resisted the policy at the time. His silence during this crisis was never challenged directly by contemporaries, but remained a potential political weakness throughout his later career. On the 1st of May 305, Diocletian, weakened by illness, formally abdicated in a ceremony at Nicomedia, while Maximian resigned simultaneously in Milan. According to the Christian writer Lactantius, Galerius manipulated the succession so that his allies would dominate the new arrangement. Many at the time expected Constantine, the son of Constantius, and Maxentius, the son of Maximian, to be elevated. Instead, Constantius and Galerius became the senior emperors, Augusti, while Severus and Maximinus Daia, Galerius's nephew, were appointed junior emperors, Caesars. Constantine and Maxentius were excluded entirely. Some later sources suggest that Galerius even tried to have Constantine killed after Diocletian's abdication. They describe episodes in which Constantine was supposedly sent into near-suicidal missions, such as leading cavalry into a swamp, or being forced into single combat with a lion. These tales are difficult to verify, but they reflect the dangers Constantine faced as long as he remained at Galerius's court. Understanding the risks of his position, Constantine looked for an opportunity to rejoin his father in the West. Constantius soon requested that his son be allowed to accompany him on campaign in Britain. After a night of heavy drinking, Galerius grudgingly gave his consent. Constantine, fearing a change of mind, fled the court at once. Riding hard from one post house to the next, he is said to have disabled the horses behind him to prevent pursuit. By the time Galerius discovered his absence, it was too late. Constantine had already reached Gaul and reunited with his father at Bononia, modern Boulogne, in the summer of 305. Together, they crossed the Channel to Britain and travelled to Eboracum, York, the provincial capital of Britannia Secunda. Constantine campaigned with his father against the Picts beyond Hadrian's Wall during the summer and autumn. The campaign, like earlier ones by Septimius Severus, pushed deep into northern Britain without achieving decisive success. Constantius, however, was gravely ill. On the 25th of July, 306, he died at Eboracum. Before his death, he expressed support for his son as successor. The army, led by the Alemannic king Crocus, a barbarian general in Roman service, proclaimed Constantine as Augustus. Soldiers loyal to Constantius acclaimed him, and Britain and Gaul quickly accepted his rule. Though Spain, which had only recently come under Constantius's control, refused recognition. Constantine formally informed Galerius of his father's death and his own elevation, sending both a letter and a portrait of himself wearing the robes of an emperor wreathed in bay leaves. He claimed that the acclamation had been forced on him by his troops. Galerius was enraged when he received the message and nearly had the portrait and messenger burned alive. His advisors persuaded him to compromise, warning that rejecting Constantine outright would provoke war. Reluctantly, Galerius accepted Constantine, but granted him only the junior title of Caesar, reserving the rank of Augustus for Severus. To underline his authority, Galerius himself sent Constantine the imperial purple robes. Constantine accepted, knowing that recognition from Galerius would solidify his legitimacy, even if his ambition for higher rank had to wait. Constantine's portion of the empire included Britain, Gaul, and Spain, giving him command of one of the largest Roman armies positioned along the crucial Rhine frontier. After being acclaimed emperor, he remained in Britain long enough to push back Pictish tribes and secure control of the northern provinces. He completed the reconstruction of military bases begun by his father and improved the region's roads before moving to Augusta Treverorum, modern Trier, the capital of the Northwestern Empire. His rise did not go unnoticed by Rome's enemies. In the winter of 306 to 307, the Franks crossed the Rhine and invaded Gaul. Constantine struck back, defeated them, and captured their kings Ascaric and Meragius, who, along with their soldiers, were executed publicly in the amphitheater of Trier as part of the celebrations marking Constantine's arrival. After these victories, he began an ambitious program of building in Trier. He fortified the city with new towers and gates, built a palace complex, a large audience hall, and an enormous bathhouse meant to rival those of Rome. Throughout Gaul, he sponsored new construction, particularly in Autun and Arles, which helped strengthen his rule and boost the economy. Constantine's policies also distinguished him from other rulers of the age. According to later Christian writers, he adopted a policy of tolerance toward Christians, ending their persecution in his territories and restoring property that had been seized. Although he had not yet converted, this stance contrasted sharply with the harsh measures of Galerius and set Constantine apart as a different kind of leader. In his early propaganda, he leaned heavily on his father's reputation, but his military achievements and building projects soon allowed him to stand on his own. Orators compared him favorably with Constantius, and Christian writers such as Eusebius described him as a renewal of his father's reign. His coinage and monuments often emphasized Roman superiority over the barbarians across the frontiers, and one coin issue following his victory over the Alemanni depicted defeated tribesmen kneeling in despair beneath the inscription, "Romans Rejoicing." His panegyrists praised his uncompromising stance, declaring that mercy for conquered foes was foolishness. Events in Italy soon brought further complications. When Galerius formally recognized Constantine as Caesar, His portrait was sent to Rome as custom required. Maxentius, the son of Maximian, mocked the young emperor as the child of a low-born woman and grew jealous of his authority. On the 28th of October 306, he declared himself emperor. Galerius refused to recognize him and sent Severus against him in 307. But Severus's troops, many of whom had once served under Maximian, defected. Severus was captured and later killed. Maximian, recalled from retirement by his son's rebellion, traveled to Gaul to seek Constantine's support. He offered Constantine his daughter Fausta in marriage and the rank of Augustus in exchange for recognition of Maxentius in Italy. Constantine agreed, married Fausta in Trier in the summer of 307, and gave nominal recognition to Maxentius while carefully avoiding direct involvement in Italian affairs. Instead, Constantine turned his attention north. In 308, he campaigned against the Bructeri and constructed a bridge across the Rhine at Cologne. 2 years later, he fought the Franks again in the northern Rhineland. When not campaigning, he toured his provinces, offering patronage, supporting the arts, and promoting prosperity. His refusal to enter the civil war in Italy enhanced his popularity in Gaul and Britain, where people valued his stability and protection of the frontiers. Meanwhile, tensions between Maxentius and Maximian deepened. In early 308, Maximian tried to usurp his son's throne, failed, and returned to Constantine's court. That same year, Galerius convened a conference at Carnuntum to restore order. Diocletian briefly returned from retirement to preside alongside Galerius and Maximian. The council forced Maximian to abdicate once more, demoted Constantine back to Caesar, and elevated Licinius as Augustus in the west. Constantine, however, refused to accept the demotion. He continued to present himself as Augustus on his coinage, and within 2 years Galerius himself was referring to him with that title. The crisis deepened in 310 when Maximian, once again stripped of power, rebelled while Constantine was campaigning on the Rhine. Sent to Arles with part of Constantine's army, Maximian spread rumors that Constantine had died and declared himself emperor. Although he promised rewards to those who supported him, most troops remained loyal to Constantine, and Maximian was forced to flee. Constantine broke off his campaign and rushed south, moving swiftly by river to Lyon. Maximian retreated to Marseille, but the city's inhabitants opened the gates to Constantine. Captured and confronted, Maximian was compelled to commit suicide in July 310. Maxentius, seeking to gain legitimacy from his father's death, honored him as a deified emperor and minted coins bearing his image, promising to avenge him. Constantine at first presented Maximian's end as a family tragedy, but soon spread a harsher story: that Maximian, after receiving pardon, had plotted to murder Constantine in his sleep. According to this account, Fausta warned her husband, who tricked Maximian into killing a eunuch in his bed. Caught in the act, Maximian was forced to take his own life. To cement this version, Constantine ordered a damnatio memoriae against Maximian, erasing his inscriptions and removing his images from public monuments. The death of Maximian forced Constantine to reshape his public image. He could no longer rely on ties to the elder emperor and instead turned to a new dynastic claim, tracing his lineage to the 3rd century emperor Claudius II, celebrated for his victory over the Goths. At a speech in Gaul in July 310, an orator declared that Constantine's right to rule was rooted in ancestry, not the compromises of the Tetrarchy. The speech also introduced a new religious dimension, describing Constantine as having received a divine vision of Apollo and victory, granting him laurel wreaths and the promise of long rule over the whole world. Constantine himself was portrayed as a savior figure, the fulfillment of Virgil's prophecy of a ruler destined to bring order. This ideological shift was reflected in his coinage. Earlier issues emphasized Mars, but after 310 Mars disappeared, and Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, became his divine patron. Whether or not the dynastic claims or the vision were factual, they strengthened his legitimacy and bolstered his popularity among the people of Gaul. By 310, Galerius had become gravely ill and could no longer take an active role in imperial politics. His final official act was a proclamation issued in Nicomedia on the 30th of April 311, declaring an end to the persecutions and restoring religious toleration throughout the empire. Soon after, he died in agony, his body consumed by a hideous disease. Christian writers such as Eusebius interpreted his suffering as divine punishment for his brutal policies, describing his death in graphic detail to emphasize his downfall. With Galerius gone, what remained of the Tetrarchic system disintegrated. Maximinus moved quickly to seize Asia Minor, while Constantine continued consolidating his rule in Britain and Gaul. In Rome, Maxentius strengthened his position by fortifying northern Italy and appealing to Christians by allowing them to elect Eusebius as Bishop of Rome. Despite these efforts, Maxentius's rule remained unstable. Heavy taxation and economic stagnation provoked unrest in Rome and Carthage, while a rival named Domitius Alexander managed to briefly usurp his authority in Africa. By 312, Maxentius was tolerated rather than supported, even by many within Italy. Determined to strengthen his hold, he declared war on Constantine, blaming him for the death of his father, Maximian. To prevent Maxentius from forming an alliance with Licinius, Constantine instead allied with Licinius himself, sealing the pact by offering him his sister Constantia in marriage. In retaliation, Maximinus forged an agreement with Maxentius, recognizing him as emperor in exchange for military cooperation. Tension mounted across the empire as armies mobilized and regions prepared for open conflict. Although his advisors, generals, and even soothsayers urged caution and counseled against an attack, Constantine ignored their warnings. Inspired by a conviction that many of his followers regarded as divinely guided, he resolved to march on Italy. In the spring of 312, he crossed the Cottian Alps with about 40,000 men. His first encounter came at Segusium, modern Susa, a fortified town that shut its gates against him. Constantine ordered the gates set aflame, and his men scaled the walls, taking the city quickly. He forbade looting and pressed forward into northern Italy. At Turin, he faced a powerful force of Maxentian heavy cavalry. In the ensuing battle, Constantine's troops encircled the enemy, flanking them with cavalry and dismounting them with iron-tipped clubs. The result was a decisive victory. Turin refused to shelter the fleeing soldiers and instead opened its gates to Constantine. Other northern Italian cities followed suit, sending embassies to congratulate him. He marched into Milan, which received him with open gates and rejoicing citizens, and paused there to rest his army before advancing to Brescia. That city's defenders offered little resistance, and Constantine pushed on to Verona, where a strong Maxentian army under the command of Ruricius Pompeianus was entrenched. Verona was surrounded on three sides by the Adige River, giving the defenders a natural advantage. Constantine attempted a flanking maneuver by sending troops across the river in secret, but Ruricius countered with a detachment. Constantine defeated this force, encircled the city, and laid siege. Ruricius slipped out to gather reinforcements but was met in battle, killed, and his army destroyed. Verona surrendered soon afterward, followed by Aquileia, Modena, and Ravenna. The road to Rome now lay open. Maxentius, as before in earlier conflicts, placed his hopes in Rome itself. He prepared for a siege, relying on the city's formidable Aurelian walls, its Praetorian Guard, and the grain supply from Africa. Bridges across the Tiber were cut to hinder Constantine's approach, leaving central Italy exposed. Constantine advanced steadily down the Via Flaminia, gaining support from local communities that no longer feared Maxentius. Discontent in Rome grew, and at the chariot races on the 27th of October, the crowd mocked Maxentius openly, declaring Constantine invincible. Pressured by omens and shaken by the loss of support, Maxentius abandoned his defensive strategy, and prepared for battle. On the 28th of October 312, the 6th anniversary of his reign, he marched north to confront Constantine. Maxentius still commanded an army nearly twice the size of Constantine's, and he positioned his troops with their backs to the Tiber. It was at this point that Constantine introduced a new and mysterious element. His soldiers bore strange symbols on their standards and shields. Later, Christian sources offered different explanations. Lactantius wrote that Constantine dreamed of a heavenly command to mark his soldiers' shields with the sign of Christ, using the Greek letters chi and rho. Eusebius described a vision of a cross of light appearing in the sky above the sun, with the words, "In this sign conquer," followed by a dream in which Christ instructed Constantine to create a new standard, the labarum, bearing the same symbol. Whatever the precise origin, Constantine's army now marched under a Christian emblem. The Battle of the Milvian Bridge was swift but decisive. Constantine launched a cavalry charge that broke Maxentius's mounted troops, followed by an infantry assault that drove many of Maxentius's men into the Tiber. Though some of the Praetorians and horse guards resisted at first, they too collapsed under repeated charges. Panic spread, and soldiers fled across a makeshift bridge of boats. Maxentius himself was caught in the chaos, forced into the river, and drowned. His body was later recovered from the Tiber. With this victory, Constantine became the unchallenged ruler of the Western Roman Empire. The triumph at the Milvian Bridge would soon be remembered not only as a turning point in Constantine's career, but also as a defining moment in the history of Christianity. Constantine entered Rome on the 29th of October 312 in a triumphal procession that was greeted with enthusiasm and celebration. Maxentius's body, recovered from the Tiber, was decapitated, and his head was displayed through the streets of the capital before being sent to Carthage, a gesture that brought resistance in Africa to an end. Unlike emperors before him, Constantine did not climb the Capitoline Hill to offer sacrifices at the Temple of Jupiter. Instead, he appeared before the Senate in the Curia Julia, where he promised to restore their traditional privileges and ensure their role in his reorganized government. He declared there would be no reprisals against those who had supported his defeated rival. In response, the Senate honored him by placing his name first on official decrees and proclaiming him the greatest Augustus. Constantine also recalled political exiles, freed prisoners held by Maxentius, and restored property confiscated during his predecessor's rule. A sweeping propaganda campaign followed. Maxentius's image was erased from monuments and official memory, and he was denounced as a tyrant, contrasted with Constantine's portrayal as the liberator of Rome. Public works commissioned by Maxentius, such as the Temple of Romulus and the massive basilica on the Forum, were rededicated in Constantine's name. At the center of the basilica, a statue of Constantine holding the Christian labarum declared in its inscription that it was by this sign that Rome had been freed from oppression. To overshadow Maxentius's legacy further, Constantine expanded the Circus Maximus so that its capacity dwarfed his rival's racetrack on the Via Appia. He then dismantled Maxentius's most loyal military institutions, disbanding the Praetorian Guard and the Imperial Horse Guard, erasing their identity, and even repurposing their tombstones into new basilicas. Their former headquarters became the site of the Lateran Basilica, dedicated within weeks of Constantine's entry into Rome. Other units of Maxentius's army were scattered to distant frontier posts along the Rhine, preventing them from forming any power base in Italy. In the years that followed, Constantine consolidated his supremacy over his remaining rivals. In 313, he met Licinius in Milan, sealing their alliance by arranging the marriage of Licinius to his half-sister Constantia. From this meeting came the famous Edict of Milan, which proclaimed full religious toleration across the empire. Christianity, in particular, benefited. Confiscated property was restored, persecution ceased, and Christian communities gained legal standing. The text of the agreement avoided specific references to any single deity, instead invoking a general supreme divinity as a unifying formula. Their partnership was short-lived. News soon arrived that Maximinus had invaded Europe, prompting Licinius to leave Milan and defeat him in battle, securing control of the eastern provinces. Tensions between Constantine and Licinius grew quickly. Constantine survived an assassination plot linked to a man whom Licinius had wanted elevated to the rank of Caesar. Licinius retaliated by destroying Constantine's statues in Emona. Open war followed. At the Battle of Cibale, Constantine defeated his rival, and another clash at Mardia forced a settlement. Constantine's sons Crispus and Constantine II, along with Licinius's son Licinius Jr., were named Caesars in 317. Constantine took control of the dioceses of Pannonia and Macedonia, ruling from Sirmium, which allowed him to launch successful campaigns against the Goths and Sarmatians in the following years. Despite the earlier Edict of Milan, Licinius began to restrict Christians around 320. Though he avoided mass executions, he dismissed Christian officials, confiscated church property, and increasingly treated the growing church as politically unreliable. Christian historians later described him as a persecutor, portraying his stance as evidence of loyalty to the old pagan order. By 324, the fragile balance between the emperors collapsed. Constantine's supporters framed the coming conflict as a war between Christianity and paganism, with his army marching under the Labarum and Licinius relying on Gothic mercenaries. The two forces clashed in a decisive civil war. Constantine won victories at Adrianople, the Hellespont, and finally at Chrysopolis on the 18th of September, 324. Licinius and his colleague Martinian surrendered on condition their lives would be spared, but within a year, Constantine had both executed after accusing them of treachery. Licinius's young son was also killed soon after. With these acts, Constantine stood as the sole ruler of the Roman Empire. Recognizing the shifting balance of power within the empire, Constantine established a new imperial capital in the east. Although he considered Serdica, Sirmium, and Thessalonica, he ultimately chose Byzantium, a city whose strategic location controlled the passage between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean and secured the empire's eastern frontiers. Byzantium had already been redeveloped in Roman style by earlier emperors, making it a natural choice for expansion. In 324, the project began, and on the 11th of May, 330, the city was formally dedicated as Constantinople, the city of Constantine. It quickly became the empire's new political and cultural center, adorned with churches, forums, palaces, and monuments that rivaled those of Rome itself. Later tradition claimed Constantine had been guided by a divine vision in tracing its boundaries, presenting the city as a creation marked by heaven's approval. Religious policy was a hallmark of Constantine's reign. He ended the persecution of Christians, restored confiscated property, and supported the church with financial aid and privileges for its clergy. He sponsored major building projects, including the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem and the original St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, built directly over the Apostles' tomb. At the same time, his policies allowed for broad religious toleration, and pagan rites continued in many public ceremonies during his reign. His triumphal arch in Rome, for example, dedicated in 315, contained no Christian imagery but was decorated with pagan motifs of victory, Apollo, Diana, and Hercules. Constantine himself delayed baptism until his final illness, perhaps believing that doing so would absolve him of sins committed during his life as emperor. He also took an active role in shaping church doctrine. In disputes such as the Donatist controversy in North Africa, he acted as arbiter, confiscating property and exiling clergy when councils ruled against the movement. More significantly, in 325, he convened the First Council of Nicaea, which produced the Nicene Creed, and sought to settle disputes over Arianism and the timing of Easter. In doing so, he placed imperial authority at the service of defining Christian orthodoxy, a precedent that would shape relations between church and state for centuries. Constantine's laws also touched on Judaism. Jews were forbidden from converting others, attacking converts, or circumcising Christian slaves, although Jewish clergy enjoyed the same privileges as their Christian counterparts. These policies were firm but not harsher than those enacted by previous emperors. In administration, Constantine reversed earlier policies that had elevated equestrians over senators. He restored many offices to senatorial rank and allowed the Senate greater influence in selecting praetors and quaestors, winning the loyalty of Rome's aristocracy. Though the Senate held little real power, Constantine's reforms reintegrated it into imperial life and gave its members prestige in his new order. In the 3rd century, the Roman state attempted to cover its immense public expenses by minting fiat money, which spiraled into uncontrollable inflation. Diocletian tried, without success, to restore confidence in silver coinage, striking pure silver argenti and mixed silver-bronze pieces known as bullion. But silver coins were overvalued compared to their metal content and circulated only at reduced rates. Constantine abandoned efforts to maintain a genuine silver standard soon after 305, halting production of the pure silver argentius, though bullion coins continued to be minted into the late 4th century. Instead, he concentrated on producing large quantities of the gold solidus, a coin of consistent quality that became the backbone of Byzantine and medieval European currency for centuries. 72 solidi made a Roman pound of gold, and their stability gave security to the wealthy, while poorer classes had to make do with ever-depreciating bronze issues. Bronze currency, such as the centennialis, became the main coinage of daily use, but its repeated devaluation underscored the divide between rich and poor. Some later emperors, like Julian, attempted to restore honest bronze coinage, but Constantine's emphasis remained on gold. His monetary policies were closely tied to his religious stance. Between 331 and 336, he ordered the confiscation of gold, silver, and bronze statues from pagan temples, declaring them imperial property. These treasures were melted down for coinage, with only a handful of bronze statues preserved as monuments in Constantinople. In this way, his fiscal reforms and his weakening of pagan institutions went hand in hand. Despite his political and religious achievements, Constantine's family life was marked by tragedy. In 326, his eldest son Crispus was executed at Pola, reportedly by poison, and soon after his wife Fausta was killed in an overheated bath. Ancient writers often avoided addressing the motives, and later chroniclers offered unreliable explanations. Rumors circulated that Fausta and Crispus were involved in an illicit relationship, or that she spread such accusations to remove him as a rival to her own children. These tales were embellished into myths, echoing the tragic story of Hippolytus and Phaedra, though firm evidence is lacking. Some historians believe Constantine simply acted to tighten his control over succession, eliminating a son who was too independent and a wife whose ambitions had become threatening. In the aftermath, their names were erased from inscriptions and their memory condemned, leaving only silence in official accounts. Constantine continued to focus on the empire's frontiers. Constantinople, now firmly established as his capital, became the center of his later years. In 328, he completed a grand bridge over the Danube at Suceava, aiming to restore Roman power in Dacia. By 332, he led a campaign with the Sarmatians against the Goths, whose losses from harsh weather and lack of food forced them into submission. 2 years later, he intervened when Sarmatian commoners overthrew their chiefs. Victorious again, Constantine resettled some of them in the Balkans as farmers and drafted others into the army. He fortified the new frontier with camps and ramparts, extending Roman control and earning the title Dacicus Maximus. In his final years, Constantine planned a vast eastern campaign against Persia. He wrote to King Shapur asserting his role as protector of the Christians within Persia and warned him to treat them well. When a Persian client ruler was installed in Armenia, Constantine resolved to march east himself, framing the war as a holy enterprise. He called for bishops to accompany the army and even commissioned a portable church tent to serve as a symbol of divine support. He expressed the wish to be baptized in the River Jordan before entering Persian territory. Diplomats came seeking peace, but he dismissed them, determined to advance. The campaign was never launched. Soon after Easter in 337, Constantine fell gravely ill. He traveled to the baths near his mother's city of Helenopolis on the Gulf of Nicomedia, where he prayed in a church she had built. Realizing death was near, he asked for baptism, delaying it until this moment in the belief that he could be cleansed of all sins at the end of his life. He received the rite from Eusebius, the bishop of Nicomedia, and promised to live as a true Christian if he recovered. He died shortly afterwards on the 22nd of May, 337, at a villa outside Nicomedia on the Feast of Pentecost. His body was taken to Constantinople and interred in the Church of the Holy Apostles in a porphyry sarcophagus, a monument still described centuries later, though eventually lost after the city's sack in 1204. Fragments believed to be from his tomb survive today in Istanbul. He was succeeded by his 3 surviving sons, Constantine II, Constantius II, and Constans, who divided the empire between them, though violence soon erupted in the dynasty. Other relatives, including his nephews Dalmatius and Hannibalianus, were eliminated in purges to secure power. Through his daughters, Constantina and Helena, his legacy continued into the next generation, shaping the empire long after his death. Constantine succeeded in uniting the empire under a single ruler and secured decisive victories throughout his reign. He defeated the Franks and Alemanni in the years 306 to 308, struck down the Franks again between 313 and 314, overcame the Goths in 332, and subdued the Sarmatians in 334. By 336, he had even regained much of the province of Dacia, abandoned more than 60 years earlier under Aurelian. At the time of his death, he was preparing an ambitious campaign against Persia, aiming to end the recurring raids that troubled the eastern provinces. In matters of culture and appearance, Constantine revived the fashion of emperors with clean-shaven faces, a style once popularized by Scipio Africanus in the 2nd century BC, but abandoned when Hadrian introduced the beard as a sign of imperial dignity. With some exceptions, such as the later Emperor Julian, Constantine's revival of the shaven look endured among Roman rulers until the early 7th century. Constantine's legacy carried immense weight for centuries. In the Byzantine world, to be praised as a new Constantine became the highest form of imperial honor, and no fewer than 10 emperors bore his name, including the last sovereign of Constantinople. The Holy Roman Empire claimed him as a forefather of its tradition, and Western dynasties such as the Capetians, the Habsburgs, and the Stuarts declared descent from him, using his memory as a foundation for legitimacy. Charlemagne deliberately evoked Constantinian symbolism in his court to present himself as a direct heir to his glory, and medieval legends went further still. Geoffrey of Monmouth wove a tale linking the mythical King Arthur to Constantine's bloodline. Over time, Constantine took on a mythic aura as a champion of Christianity against non-believers. His veneration as a saint spread widely in the Byzantine Empire during its wars with Persia and later with Muslim powers, reinforcing his image as both emperor and protector of the faith. In art, his figure inspired the equestrian statues of the Romanesque age, where mounted rulers were depicted in triumphant imperial posture. Even his name experienced revival, especially in Western France during the 11th and 12th centuries. In modern times, Constantine's reputation continued to resonate. During the fascist era in Italy, his role as guarantor of the Church's freedom was frequently compared with Benito Mussolini's signing of the Lateran Pacts in 1929. Cardinal Ildefonso Schuster of Milan even claimed that Mussolini's act was a Second Edict of Milan, likening him to Constantine and Augustus. In Serbia, his birthplace of Nis honors him through its Constantine the Great airport, and in 2012, a memorial was raised in the city, followed by international commemorations of the Edict of Milan in 2013. Some modern scholars link Constantine with the concept of Caesaropapism, the fusion of religious and imperial power, arguing that his policies epitomized the unity of church and state. Others, however, caution that this association oversimplifies his reign, leaving the question open to debate.